Hello, welcome to this video. Before we get started, I wanted to cover a few things. This is actually the day after I'm editing this video, and I feel like I didn't touch on a few simple terms that I did cover at the time, and I didn't really explain them in depth during the initial recording of this video. So I wanted to take a minute before we get into the video so that I can describe some of these things and tell you a couple things that I didn't feel like I expressed very well in the initial recording of this video. One of which is that I am talking about rigging a lot in this sense. And if you know anything about rigging, rigging is very dangerous. And so you want to make sure that you are very aware of what you're doing. Make sure that you do the correct math and you understand where you're hanging from. Make sure that the points that you're attaching to are safe and secure and can handle the loads that you're lifting up. For this, I'm talking about moving heads. I'm talking about larger lights, which, they are larger loads, but I am carrying a static load, so it's not generating a lot of force, and also it is not super heavy, maybe like 100 to 150 pounds at most. So I'm not talking about like super heavy things. I'm not talking about like hauling 2 tons or anything like that. So I just wanted to make a point to say, be aware of your surroundings. Make sure that you're attaching to, I-beams or, very secure pipes that that are bolted down and then are rated to haul the weights that you are carrying. So I just want to make a quick point about that. I also wanted to say that I do talk a lot about gear in this video. There's a lot of different gear out there, and I do talk about a lot. Petzl gear is what I mostly use, which is considered climbing gear. They do have a professional line, and I have used it for professional applications, such as using it in professional theater. So that's how I typically use it, and I've seen it used by lots of different industry professionals. But this is, more considered climbing gear rather than anything. There are different gear out there that is more tailored for rigging, that you may find more useful and that may have, larger ratings for whatever you are carrying. So be aware that those options are out there. These are not the only options that I'm going to be talking about. This is just going to be my personal kit and my personal experience with using this gear. I also did want to point out, make sure that you're always using rated gear. A lot of the stuff that I use is Petzl. Petzl is great about their ratings. They're certified in UIAA and also ANSI standards across international and the Americas, which is where I reside. So I do trust their gear a lot of the time. I've used it in many instances. I haven't had any of their gear fail on me yet. But, you'll know that gear is clearly labeled. If you check on the back of it, if it'll focus. Let's see if I can move my face out of the way. You may be able to see there. It's not focusing in there. I'll attach a photo. So you may be able to notice that it'll tell you a kilonewton rating, where it is on its major axis and also when it is cross-loaded. Sometimes it will also include when the gate is open. This one does. So that is what this symbol looks like when the gate is opened. And that's not its strongest, but when it is, lifting on its major axis and the gate is open. So it will be listed on the side of that if you are using rated gear. So always be aware of that. Always look out for that. You don't want to use unrated gear in this scenario because they're just asking for an accident to happen. So I always stress about using rated gear. Make sure that you check your gear, especially runners. If you're using runners, I would always, recommend checking the stitching on them. Just run your hands through them. Make sure that there's no fabrics that are coming off. There will be ends to the stitching on there. You can see here a little bit, maybe. You can see some little fuzzies there. That's just the end of the stitching, and that's fine. But if you notice stitching coming up in the middle, if you notice a lot of it, I'd probably retire that piece of gear, retire that sling. They're not entirely expensive, so that's okay. And you always want to make sure that you're being safe, especially if you're including this into your kit, because it doesn't matter how great your carabiners are, doesn't matter how great your pulleys are. If you add this into your system and it is broken, that's a point of failure, and you don't want points of failure. So you're always going to be looking out for, especially on runners or carabiners, you're going to be looking for the kilonewton ratings, KN on there. If you can see it there. My phone will not adjust today. I'll include another photo. All right. Kilonewtons is talking about, it's generating force. It's about 225 pounds of force. And so that's how, for 1 kilonewton, that's how you measure it. For the most instance, a lot of the stuff that I have is overkill for my scenarios and when I'm using it, but I will always, be more than happy to do overkill than, getting right there at their standards. That's just how I use it in a professional application. I do also talk about in this video, I talk about mechanical advantage. So I will mention 4-to-1 or 2-to-1 or 1-to-1. And that's talking about the output force versus the input force. So 4-to-1 is 4 times stronger than the input that you're putting in. So that if you're pulling, you're hauling 4 times the weight in which you feel like you're pulling. So I do talk about that just a little bit. I do mention those terms a little bit, but for the most part, that's all I really forgot to cover in the main video. Anyways, the main video is going to start now. Thank you. Hi there, my name is Brian Garrick. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about rigging moving headlights, specifically rigging them in a space where you don't have line sets to come in, where you can't rig them from the deck, or you have to rig them in, let's say, like box booms or into your front of house. So I'm going to talk about a few of the methodologies of which I've seen. I do want to start off by saying that I am not, I wouldn't consider myself a rigger in any sense. I still have a lot of rigging experience to get. I haven't done a lot of rigging calls. I do have experience with rigging in the past, but that's not how I describe myself. So pardon me if I get some of the terminology wrong. I'm just going to be speaking about some of my own personal experience with rigging these lights and how I've seen it done in a variety of different venues. Venues that don't have a lot of money to venues that have a lot of money, a lot of equipment, where they can rig it safely. And I'm going to talk about, some of the ways that I've seen it done in the past, which may not be the safest. I'm going to talk about some of my experience with that and what I have found to be some of the best methods that I have used and I've seen other people use. And I'd really love to hear what methods you guys have used in the past, what different ways you have to rig these really heavy lights in a safe and efficient manner. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about something that is called a block and tackle system. If you're familiar with rigging, I'm sure that you've heard this term before. But basically what it is having a block, which would be a pulley or some way to divert the force, divert the line being your rope. And the tackle would be your counterweight, or the person on the other end, which is hauling the static load on the other side of the rope. So I'm going to be talking about some of the devices that I have first off, and then I'm going to be talking a little bit about the methodology which I've seen. And so I'm just going to get right into it. First device I have here is a progress capture, or a cam. This is the Petzl Pro Traction. This is a fairly new device. I haven't used this too much, but I've seen it used a lot in stage rigging and also for taking down moving heads from truss for something like a Broadway where you can't bring in the line set because it's got scenery in the way, or you got dance towers which you need to take off before bringing the whole thing down. So it may be easier to use something like this as opposed to moving things around and bringing in the truss. So this is a pretty simple device. So you can see here on one side of the device you have these teeth here. These teeth dig into the rope. They're only pointed in one direction, so it only moves in one way. You can see the clear markings here. This side is the load side and this side is the haul side. So you want to run your rope in the way that this side is where you're pulling from and this side was where the load is. When you do that, you can attach the rope in there. You can drop the cam in so that it attaches to the rope, and you can begin hauling that way. It's a progress capture so that as you're pulling, the teeth will dig into the rope and it'll stop it from going back down. So you're able to take breaks, I wouldn't say extensive breaks, but you're able to stop as you're pulling and it'll capture the progress that you made instead of it start going back in the opposite direction. I really like this device. I haven't gotten a chance to use it too much, but I've seen other people use it a lot, and so that's what motivated me to get something like this. For my own personal use, trying to get some more reading experience, and also I've seen that it's very efficient in what it does. So this is probably one of my more expensive cams. I'm going to show you one that's a little bit more expensive than this. Has a very specific use case that I'm going to talk about. But I really like this because it's an omni block. so that it can flip around in whatever orientation you have it. So you can always keep the rope in line no matter where you're sitting. It's very small so that you can, get pretty tight where, you have the pipe and also light right below it. You can get pretty tight with it. It's not very heavy at all. Very easy to keep on your person all day. There are bigger versions than this. I think that Rock Exotica makes a bigger version of this, where it may be a little bit more efficient and maybe a little bit bigger. So if you have a really heavy load on the other end. But for something like moving headlights, which they're not super heavy, but they are more heavy where you don't want to be hauling it, just with your bare hands up in a lift or whatever. This is something that is very useful to use. Next device I'm going to be talking about is the Spin L1D, also by Petzl. Very similar to the other one. This is actually the first device that I got because I didn't know if I was going to like using a progress capture. And what this is, it kind of does a similar methodology. You can see that there's ridges inside of this. And it has a ratcheting system in it so that by one side, you can hear the ratchets in there as it hauls. And then as you start going to the other side, the haul side, it stops. So I can't move the swivel in this way, and the ridges inside of it starts creating friction so that it feels lighter as for the descent. I got this because my methodology was that, pulling the light up, you don't want the cam to lock in place because you might want to pull the clamps above the pipe and then start lowering it in, but you don't want to be feeling the full weight of the light. So adding a little bit friction to it makes it feel like more controlled on the descent. And that's what I've used in the past. I think that this is still a great device. I still use it a lot. I may enjoy the cam a little bit more now because of the size, because of the progress capture when using, let's just say, less experienced stagehands. It's a lot easier to have it lock in place rather than have someone be more controlling of the rope like this. It may not be the strongest or just may not understand how it works. If you start hauling a line and then you stop pulling it and it doesn't go back down, that's pretty easy to understand, I assume, for most people. But something like this, I still really like this. I think that this is great for situations where you can't, wrap a rope around a pipe to create friction, or you want it to have a really great efficiency on the incline, and then also still create that friction on the decline. That's what I really like about this device. And that's why I still use it to this day. Something like this. This is actually the first thing that I got when I didn't have a lot of money, but I still wanted to create some kind of a progress capture. You can see that this is a steel carabiner here, so it's very strong. And then it also does have smooth bearings on the inside so that the rope can run pretty freely to it. Please excuse me. But it does not have... It's not as efficient as using a pulley. It doesn't feel as smooth. But something like this is actually a Petzl T-block. And so it has the same kind of teeth in it. And when you run the rope through it, here, I'll actually grab some rope. There we go. So you have your rope here. This is the haul side. This is the pull side. What you're going to do is you're going to want to face the teeth like this, where the teeth are pointing up towards, so that when this goes down, this grabs. Then I'm gonna grab, there's my pulley, not pulley, this is my carabiner. Gonna grab it like that. Is that correct? No, it's not. One moment. Nope. This is something I haven't used for a little while. My apologies about that. I just wanted to make sure that I demonstrated it correctly because it's been a while since I used this device. This device isn't very common in theater rigging, but it's something that Petzl came out with, and I didn't have a lot of money at the time. So this is something, Petzl T-block, I believe it's what it's called. It does have the same teeth. It's used as a micro ascender. If you know how to use an ascender, that's just a way to pull yourself up a rope. So it does have teeth in this way, and it can be used for progress capture. I've only seen it used in a couple very niche scenarios. But what I wanted to make sure is the spine is on the top here, and the carabiner is grabbing both the T-block and the rope. you don't want to make sure that the rope isn't below the carabiner, because then you're really not holding onto it. It would just be holding onto the tib lock, and it's not really made for holding weight in that way. These two little spines, I believe those will just break off if you put any significant weight on that. So you always want to make sure that your carabiner is holding the majority of the weight, and the tib lock is oriented in this way. So you can see, it goes back, and I can pull my load up, and then as it goes in this direction, I pull down on it, kind of locks in place, and it captures the progress in that way. It's not very efficient, and I didn't really like this method, but it is something that you can use to do progress capture with, and it is relatively cheap. So that's why I still keep it on my kit. It's so very small to the point where if I really needed it in a pinch, I could use it. Would not be my first choice, but still, something like this, I can just throw it in my bag. Very easy to use, very tiny, where if you have a very cramped area, like if you're in a black box, I could see something like this becoming very useful for cases like that. All right. So that's one of the first things. I did also want to just point out that I do always keep just a runner and carabiner in here, just a single action gate lock. I use this a lot just for holding things in place. If I'm running like super large cables and I don't have the strength to hold them up, or I'm just trying to use tie line and I can't get the tie line tight enough, what I can do is I can just wrap around the cable. I'm just using my arm as an example here, in a choke, and then wrap around the pipe, make it nice and tight, and then that'll help hold up some of the weight that I can put right next to it on a piece of tie line, and then I could take it off and relieve the weight, put it onto the tie line. So I always keep something like this for scenarios like that. Not exactly the same instance, but I just had it in my bag, so I thought I'd mention it. And that's all I really keep for hauling those sorts of things. I do want to point out and say that you don't need something like this for rigging moving headlights. And the most I would say is to have a nice rope, a good static rope, because you don't want to have stretch in your line as you're hauling something up. It's not in the case of like rescue, like climbing rescue, or just climbing in general. You don't want to use climbing rope for this because you don't want the materials to stretch as you're hauling something up. You want it to stay very static so that you can be very efficient on your incline. So I have this rope here. It's about 11.5 millimeters. This one's very long. I got this one from REI when I didn't really know any better. So it's 150 feet. It's a bit impractical for something like uprigging. But I do keep it around because I find it very useful for our box booms that we have in the Eccles Theater. I'll throw a picture up here so you can have a bit of a reference for that. In the instance where we're using our high booms, which should be the top ones, this actually comes very in handy if you are sitting on the high boom, and then you have your bag with your rope in it, and then you can add like a drop line. What's the actual word for that? I can't think of it. Just a little tiny piece of rope that'll tie around it and then pull some of the slack up, and you can put it around your block, your pulley, and then you can attach it that way. So I find it useful, that extra length, for something like that, where you're attaching it to the catwalk, and then you have extra ropes so that you can haul it on the ground inside the box boom instead of someone up pulling up that way. Great. So that's what I want to talk a little bit about that. The knot that I have here on this, I'm forgetting the name of it right now. I had to pull it up. It's a scaffold knot. So this is a scaffold knot that I have wrapped around this carabiner here. The carabiners that I typically like to use are these tri-lock carabiners, the oval-shaped ones. I like the oval-shaped ones because I feel like they don't cross, they don't get cross-loaded as easy. They're easier to stay in line, or if they start cross-loading, then they flip. You can see I also have captives on here to keep the rope in place, as well as, if I'm giving this to someone, I don't want them to take the carabiner off, so it's easier for me to just, add a captive to it so they can't take the carabiner off. Very easy to just wrap it around a pipe, keep it together like this, keep the whole system together. So that's why I use that. You could also use something like a clove hitch or just a typical bowline and just keep it really tight on there. And that might be more useful for you. But I find that this already has a lot of tension on it that keeps it in line, and the captive is just a little piece of plastic that helps it from slipping. It's not going to hold the whole weight on it, obviously, but it just kind of keeps it from moving around. Yeah, I like the tri-locks because it's very useful if you have less experienced stagehands who may not always forget to lock their carabiners. So auto-locking carabiners are great for that instance where, if you know how to use them, you can do it really fast, and knowing that if it's going up or down, it is going to be locked. So you don't have to worry about something like that with a very heavy load. You can see that on the end of my rope, I do have some runners. These are, what are these? 60 millimeter runners. My apologies. And these are what I find the perfect length for a bit of a larger light, where I can wrap around the handles of the light, where, you have the clamps and you have the handles on the side, and so you can do a choke on either side of the handle. You can kind of push it to the front of the light, where you have the clamps kind of sitting in the back, and then you can do these two on either side and then attach it to your point here, and that way the light stays upright. It doesn't start moving around all wonky as you start hauling it up, and you can also have a little bit more control as it starts getting to the pipe. You can kind of push your runners out of the way and have enough room to get it over the pipe, and then keep tension on it as you lock down your clamps. And then once you're all locked in, you got your safety cable on, then you can relieve tension on the line, take off these guys. So I find that this is very, very simple. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but the assistant in the Eccles, his name's Cole. What he's used for the most part is he uses a static line, just a rope, and he ties a really tight bowline. He goes around the handle, kind of sitting under the base of the light, so it kind of tilts the light a little bit forward. And he ties a very tight bowline on the top so that it doesn't really move around. And then he hauls it up around the pipe to create friction, and he pulls it up, and then he kind of gets it over the pipe. Then he can lock it in, and then he can undo the bowline and take it off that way. And in that instance, you don't require anything like runners. You don't require pulleys. It is a little bit less efficient because you are adding more friction by wrapping it around the pipe. So you do need to have a bit of strength. He's a pretty strong guy, so he can manage that just fine. And it may be a little bit faster to do if you're more experienced than that, if you can trust your knots. But I find that, for higher areas, and if you have a lot of lights that are kind of going in the same area, it is a little bit easier for me to just pull out a pulley and use it in that way. But I thought I'd just mention it here. Another house that I've worked in, a regional theater that had a lot of money, the way that we would hang our moving lights in there is that we would have a pipe that we use burger clamps that would attach to the catwalk, and on the end of the pipe would be a little peanut motor, like a quarter-ton motor, and we use this same method, like I talked about before, where we wrap around, it would have a carabiner on the end, and then we'd wrap around the handles, and then pick up the light that way, get it off the pipe, it would come in, and then you do the opposite on the incline, and that's how you put it back up. So that's how we'd use it in that scenario. It is a little bit heavier, but in that house we would be changing out the gobo wheels a lot of the time, and so we'd have to use every single light, and it was a little bit faster that way. We'd have less people so that we didn't have to pull rope all the time. It was just easier to use a chain motor in that scenario. And they had the money to afford a peanut motor. So, something like that could be very useful for you. I have also experienced other people who have done something kind of similar to what I said before, where, Cole, for instance, he'll tie a bowline on. I've also seen people who don't tie a knot, just have both ends of the rope and kind of wrap around the base of it and haul it up two ways. And in that instance, I can see how that can be successful, and I can see why that might be easy for people to use. But in that instance, you do need two people, or at least one person who can manage two ends of the rope and haul it up that way. But I find that there's a lot of risk in that. There's not a lot of safety built into that, because if you lose control of one end, or if you're not inclining at the same speed, the light's going to get wonky. It's going to start moving around the rope. It's not secured on the rope, and it may be a little bit harder to get it over the pipe, that I have found. But some people have done that, and it's not my favorite method, but I've seen people have success doing that. So you may be interested in doing something like that. Yeah, I wanted to say that the examples that I've kind of given have just been a one-to-one block and tackle system. I don't see a lot of people using like 2-to-1s or 4-to-1s, which may be more efficient if you have very heavy lights. But at least at this point in the theater industry, the lights aren't that heavy. They may be, up to 100, maybe 150 pounds. But if you're diverting your rope and you're using, quality equipment, you're going to find that it's a pretty easy task to pull that stuff up. And it may take you more time, and time is money in this industry, to attach something like a 2-to-1 or a 4-to-1 hauling system. And, you may not have enough rope for that if you're just using like 75 feet of rope and you're trying to pick it up and go like, 30, 20 to 30 feet in the air, whatever the trim is for whatever you're hanging. You may be running out of rope if you do something like that. And it just takes more time. And if you're doing multiple lights, it takes a lot of time to undo that system and then redo it every single time and manage all that rope. I don't see it done very often, is basically what I'm trying to say. But I do see that could be an option for something like a university, or something like, something like a house where you're constantly kind of bringing things up to the same location, just like up to a catwalk or whatever. If you have a storage area in your catwalk, you can add like a permanent solution where I could see someone using like a 4-to-1 system to haul up all their lights from the deck or from the house. I could see that being very useful. Something like this guy, where you can create an easy 2-to-1. It's already got the hole on the bottom, where if you get like a 2-point, or just have two pulleys married together, you can create a very easy 2-to-1 with something like this, and make a pretty simple hauling system. I kind of want to make this video because I was thinking a lot about my college days, and about how, I wouldn't say ignorant, but I just hadn't seen it done a lot of different ways, where I found myself a lot of the time just hauling up stuff just, on like a 20 or 30 foot ladder, where I'm going up to the catwalk and I'm holding like, like a luster, or, a small moving head, and I'm just holding it in one hand and I'm climbing up a ladder with the other one. Obviously that's not safe, but I've seen it done many different places from people who are just, less experienced, or just don't know these other methods. So I do want to hear from you guys. I do want to see what types of methods that you have. I do want to hear about, talking about some of my methodology. I use a lot of just 1-to-1 systems because I don't have a lot of time to create more complex systems, especially if I'm moving around in the house a lot, or if I'm, bringing down multiple different lights in different locations. Tell me what has worked for you guys. Tell me, if there's any methodology, if there's anything that you want to add to this conversation. I really love to hear about that and see what types of devices you use, or types of knots, or types of, just anything. Let me know what you guys thoughts. Thank you very much for tuning in, and that's all I have. Thanks very much. Bye. And good luck, of course.